Welcome everyone to Temple Emanu-El. It's wonderful to have you here with us tonight. I am Rabbi Sydney Mintz, and this is our beloved congregant and guest, Antonio Hobson Salazar, or Salazar-Hobson, as he is affectionately known. I have to say that your impact, first of all, on my life, the impact of your and Catherine's presence here, and your children, Adela and Beto, have always lifted me up as members of our congregation. We've known each other for over 26 years.
That's right.
I started at Temple Emanu-El in 1997 and became acquainted with Antonio and his beautiful wife, Catherine, and their two kids. Adela was 5 or 6 years old. She's here tonight, as is Catherine. And I immediately became interested in them whenever they showed up. They're a fascinating family. And I'm sorry Beto's not here with us, but he's here with us in spirit. Their son lives in Las Vegas. And when Antonio asked me to write a blurb for his memoir, honestly, I have to say, I didn't know his entire story until that time. And I read the book, and that is how I became aware of the unbelievable life he has led, and the bravery and the ability to live through some of the most difficult and horrific experiences any child can, and to come through and not only live a life of purpose and meaning, to choose Judaism as an adult, to find love in your life and share that life with that life and that love with your wife and with your children, but with the world, and to become somebody who has contributed so much, really has been so meaningful to me as your rabbi. So I was honored to write a blurb, and then, as I shared with you, I read the book twice. The first time I read it, it was very difficult because I feel like Antonio's story is a story of a dear friend, and in revealing the truth of your childhood, it was heartbreaking. And that was the first read, and then I wrote the blurb. And then I read it again in order to really dig deeper into his story and to the hopefulness that comes from the reading of his story, his memoir, and his bravery, especially given that this month is National Child Trafficking Awareness Month.
That's correct.
So we thought that January would be a great time to focus on this, specifically because we have so far to go when it comes to people of color, Jews of color, and especially children of color in this country, and the ways that we need to start working together. And Antonio's story, as you will see, and hopefully if you haven't read the book, you'll buy the book and you'll read the book, is a story that encourages us as a Jewish community, as a human community, to see the disparities between the resources that we give to specifically children of color and Caucasian children, and the work that we can do and that we must do together. So I'll show you something. I printed out my questions, and somebody else printed out his bio. So I'm going to put my glasses on, and although I could tell a lot about your story, I want to read this because there is so much that you've done already, and I also know there's so much that you have yet to do. Antonio Salazar-Hobson was the 11th of 14 migrant farm worker children born in Phoenix, Arizona. His parents worked the national picking circuit for 40 years. At age 4, he was kidnapped by a childless, middle-aged white couple and was trafficked until the age of 10. As a teenager, Antonio met Cesar Chavez, was taken under his wing, a miracle which helped define his life, also gave rise to the title of your memoir. Antonio worked with Cesar over the next 2 decades. Antonio got a master's from Stanford in Latin American Studies as a Danforth Fellow, then went on to graduate law school from UC Davis Law School and became a labor attorney. He worked with United Farm Workers, large international unions, for the past 30 years. Antonio has represented the Native Americans from California to the Sioux Nation for 20 years, both Indian tribes and individuals, including Emmy Award-winning filmmakers, renowned authors, and professors. He represented the Communications Workers of America for several years as the District 9 Counsel, represented the CWA in national cases with a great deal of success, and he has spent 30 years representing labor coalitions for the United Farm Workers, continuing to be a leading force in any labor issues, and was also the controller of the California Democratic Party for 8 years, The other thing you didn't put in here was how influential you were with the Mexican Heritage Museum in San Francisco.
Yes, but I'd like to begin that, my life has been a joy in most ways. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why it's been that way is that you've been with me there every step of the way, in the best of times and some of the challenging of times, but you have an innate tenderness and understanding, and I've been blessed by that. And I think that's why we as a family feel so affectionate towards this temple, and we feel like we are in the right place. So thank you very much.
Well, I feel like you are the kind of mensch, when you chose Judaism, you did us a great kavod. You gave us such a great honor to fuse your tribal story with our tribal story and to bring them together. So as a result of that story, I want us to be emboldened to help the families that you represent. So this memoir, Antonio, We Know You, is incredibly compelling and very difficult to read. So I want to begin by asking you, why did you write it at this point in your life? What compelled you to write the memoir?
Well, first of all, what I realize is that I'm one of tens of thousands of cases that have occurred, particularly with children of color. I realized that I had to do something to address that disparity, because there was really almost a complete absence of resources for looking for abducted and trafficked children of color, in contrast to the well-deserved resources that some Caucasian children receive. It's not all of them, of course. And I thought, I really needed to tell my story so that they would know what happens to a child. But that being one point. But I wrote it for three reasons, really. I wrote it to provide a legacy for my family, the Salazar family. I'm the 11th of 14 children, as you said. And what, I was born as a mute child. And that's important in my life, because it meant that I was able to really notice things. And when I was kidnapped, I had tens of thousands of memories of my siblings and of my family. And that's what really held me together. And so as I wrote the book, I said, one of the things that families of color often do not get, most of the time, is that they don't get their legacy to be written. And that's a personal outrage. It's an absence of our true history. And I thought that with my family, we are a Mexican family, we are a Chicano family, that we needed to remind ourselves that we as a people, we built this nation. We fed this nation. We have been silenced for a very long time, but not as of today, because we are 64 million people strong in this country, and we have found out about our rights. And part of this is an extension of finding out about our rights with this disparity with our abandoned children. So I wanted to do that. The second reason I really wrote it was because I wanted to give abused and trafficked children a model of hope. You'll see in my story that it was very difficult, but I had one thing which held me together, and that was my mother, Petra Salazar-Hobson, and my real name is Antonio Salazar-Hobson. And she taught me how to love in those 4 years. And when you go through what I go through, or what I went through, you really have a choice. Can you move forward towards the light, or do you move towards darkness? And my mother, Petra, said, move towards the light. And that's where you need to stay, Antonio. And so I've carried that strength. And I carried that strength for 24 years looking for them. And I was lucky enough to be able to find them. Now, the other reason, and the last reason why I wrote the book, is that we have to look at this issue of disparity. What are the sources for it? What are the historical reasons for it? And it can be reduced to a couple of things without engaging in guilt, right? Which is, we know that we've had several centuries of racism, and that's just a fact. We also know that the reason probably why we haven't received any resources is that we've been considered an expendable people. That's no longer the case. And so what I want to do is I want to say there's a political solution here. There's a way to accrue resources, both legislatively and otherwise. And I want to send this message out to all communities and particularly to those people who have been affected like I have been. 1 out of 10 children in this nation have been abused. This is a very real phenomenon. And I am just blessed that I was given the stamina early on, and that I had early leaders in my life that saved me. The first is I really wasn't surrounded by any. I was mostly a child who was alone with 2 white people who were insane and who were pedophiles. But I was able to meet countless Mexican families along the way, all my life as a young person. And they always took me in. They knew something was wrong. They would try to ask, but I would always pretend that nothing was wrong. And I would spend scores of meals of various of these Mexican families who would just say, "This is your place. Come sit with us." And it was that kind of love that allowed me to survive. I want to say that I think that the book is very, very hopeful. I just absolutely needed to provide an example of hope for abused and abducted children. I wanted to tell them a couple of basic things, which is, you are a human being. You have a heart which you need to protect. These terrible things will have happened to you, but you need to endure, because you have to believe in one thing. You have to believe that you can keep your heart intact, and you have to believe that you can love as a young person when you leave these circumstances, that this is not the end of the road, and that you need to seek help. And seeking help is as simple as calling 911 or calling your school counselor. But you must not reside in silence. There's a lot of shame with my community, and that needs to be erased. I think it can be erased fairly quickly, quite frankly. Once we say, this happens to all of us, what do? This is a collective problem. So that's some of the original reasons why I wrote the book, and I think I've worked to accomplish that. I would like to mention that my work is being recognized, and I've done many national interviews and many readings. I've been pleased to do that. But I did receive some good news this morning that the TV producers called me today and said that the show that I did is going to be, has been submitted for an Emmy. And I take pride in that, because it means that there's going to be more power to my message, and people will find that message more accessible, just simply having that to be the case. So what else might I answer?
Well, everything. I mean, so about that. So you wrote this memoir, Antonio, We Know You.
Maybe I should tell you how that name came from.
I want you to tell me, but I also want to know, I mean, this could have been a small family memoir that went on the bookshelf of Adela and Beto, and your grandchildren will read it one day,
Yeah.
God willing, but that it could have been a family memoir. Are you surprised that you have been asked to do national interviews and that the LA story that you did was nominated for an Emmy? Or was that something that was intentional?
Well, it was submitted for an Emmy. No, it was entirely unintentional. I knew that one of the traits that I can bring, along with many of the other leaders who will come with me, is that I am an advocate, and I am a trial attorney. I work exclusively in federal court, and so I sort of saw this book as a case, quite frankly. Tell your story. Tell it exactly how it is. At least take 7 pages in this book to explain what happens to an abused child, every abused child. It's not, I heard a short lecture, I never have to think about it again. No, have an image and know that is something we can stop. I've also done a great deal of interviews in Spanish. I did an interview this week with Telemundo. I did an interview this week with La Prensa and other Spanish stations. And I find that when I speak in Spanish to my own people, that there's an intimacy and there's an instant identification with motherhood, what mothers can provide, how they can save their children. They understand. And so, I mean, I've been pleased to be able to reach out. I also want to say that, one of the things that I'm looking for quite frankly, audiences that I know will have experienced some of these things. I've been very involved in the GLPT community for 30 years. I won the first transgender case in the nation for SEIU back in 1985. I was on the Human Rights Commission for 7 years when I was in charge of gay rights and enforcement of city contracts and violations for city labor. And the hero of my story is a gay cowboy who never touched me, never had an interest in me. And on the third year, when I had tried to kill myself with a suicide, and he could see he could see the burns around my neck, which I did not know were there. And a shower pipe had broken because I had hung myself from a shower pipe. And I had clothed myself very carefully because I thought that was the only way to return to your family. And so I was fully clothed, and there I was hanging, and I had lost consciousness, and then it broke. And he came in and said, he just looked at me, and he held me for an hour and a half, and I sobbed. I've only cried maybe 2 or 3 times as a young person. And that night he went to the owner's office and said, that will stop immediately, or you will be reported. It's that kind of heroism that I want to thank the gay community for stepping forward and saying, this will not pass. And I think there are many examples that people have, in their lives, like that, people supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think that sometimes we forget how little time has passed. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about the 80s, that was a long time ago to represent somebody who was trans. Mm-hmm. And in that way, you really you paved the way in so many ways legally.
Yes.
And I want to talk to you about the title of your book, mm-hmm. How you met Cesar Chavez, about Jimmy Baca, and tell us a little bit about the title, Cesar Chavez, and then Jimmy Baca, who wrote the foreword.
Okay. The name of the book is Antonio, We Know You. It's been translated. It's in Spanish. It's called Te Conocemos, Antonio. And I mean, I'm very pleased that that's been done, and it's really helped me with the Spanish language community in general. The title. Let me start here. When I met Cesar Chavez, I had been picking fruit for 3 summers in the Central Valley. As a farm worker and as a student, this is something which most Chicanos did, particularly those of us of limited income. And in the 3rd year, there was a call at my high school, at Lodi High, and I have my good friend here, whom I've known for 55 years, who was there as well, Sherry. And they said, come to the Union Hall and meet Cesar. And so about 8 of us piled into a car. And we went down to the Union Hall, and he was sitting there, and he had all of these chairs around. And he spent 2 hours with us, and he asked us, well, what's your name? And I said, well, my name is Antonio Salazar-Hobson, but my real name is Antonio Salazar-Hobson, and here are the names of my parents, and here are the names of my brothers and sisters, and this is where we come from, and that's me, and I've been picking fruit for 3 years, and I see the injustice in the fields, and I'm 15 years old, and I want to do something. And he saw something special in me, something I couldn't see. I was a young boy at the time. And he asked me to volunteer for him for a year at Stockton, where I lived. And so I did do that. And after a year, he took me aside, and of course we were speaking in Spanish, and he said to me, Antonio, I think you're sufficiently talentoso, sufficiently talented to become an attorney. Would you consider being an attorney for our labor movement? Now, I never had any dream. I had no idea where I was going. I knew I was with my people, but I had that dream. It was given to me. I never lost it. I've never looked back, and it's because of that I've spent the 35 years in labor. It's because of that I'm a federal attorney on behalf of Indians. It's because of following what he said I could do, and the privilege to have worked with him on and off for 20 years. And then it gets back to my book and where the title came from. I had a problem in financing my university, as many of us do. And I had finished my 2nd year, and I was still under 18. And I was desperately in need of money. And all the students from my area worked in one place. And there was a one factory town in Lodi, California. And it was a cannery, 2,400 people. And that cannery paid well. Back then it was paying $500 a week if you worked 72 hours. That was a fortune. And I was working at minimum jobs. I had no savings. I didn't have obviously any parental income, any of that stuff. And I went to Cesar, and I'd known him now for 3 years. And I knew I had to ask him permission. And what I had to ask him permission is, could I join this factory? A factory represented by the Teamsters, our nemesis, the people we have fought with. I was in the 1973 lettuce strike, picking fruit there in Salinas for 4 months. We saw it. To go to Cesar and say, can I work for a Teamster affiliated group? Because there's no other choice for me at this point. And I knew that I would say, I would do anything that he said. And I told him that. Whatever you want me to do, I will do. And there were a bunch of men around him. And they were all, guffawing and saying what the hell was going on and who was this boy and those kinds of things. And Cecil raised his hand. And it's very calmly. He looked at me in front of all these people and he says, Antonio, we know you. We know that you will always be with La Causa. And that enabled me. But for that, I would have not finished my education. I would have stopped as a sophomore. That was it. And so it was Cesar who both gave me the dream to be what I could be, what I should be, what many of us could have been, but were lost along the way. And I took him as really my most central person. And I followed that up not only with the 20 years, but I had many mentors. I know there was an individual here talking about Dr. Norman O'Brown earlier. Well, Dr. Norman O'Brown was my advisor for 5 years, and I had the benefit of this great British scholar saying, he's the one who plucked me out. He's the one who found me penniless in a cabin outside of my college because all my scholarships had been taken away by John and Sarah Hobson because I was a fraud, and they'd written it to the chancellor, and the chancellor believed him. And I walked in and I had nothing. Not any of my local scholarships, my state scholarships, nothing. And he came to me and he just introduced himself as I was sitting on this campus. And he says, my name is Nabi, what's your name? And I said, it's Antonio. He says, well, where do you think that comes from? And I said, I don't really know, but I think it might come from San Antonio de Padua. And he says, Antonio, that's a really good place to start. Let me tell you where your name comes from. And he spent 15 minutes telling me every iteration of my name through the 2,000 to 3,000 years. And it was just an amazing moment. And he came to know me. He was born in Mexico. We spoke Spanish. I told him my situation finally because I needed to have somebody help me. I had no one. And he said, come back tomorrow. We had 3 meetings. He says, come back tomorrow. And he said, I walked into the chancellor's office and I had all your money restored. All of it. But I'll tell you what, Antonio, that there's a price here. You are going to work harder than any student you know. Don't ever compare yourself to them. You're going to work for me. And he spent those 5 years really shaping me, allowing me to be a Danforth Fellow, to go to Stanford. And just an example of yet another great Caucasian ally that reached out his hand for me. So I mean, I've been fortunate in those respects, and I was very lucky when I started my career. I mean, I did work 5 years in factories. I did work 4 years in the fields, those kinds of things. But when I started my career as an attorney, I was lucky enough to start the first day as a labor attorney with the union. And just that little bit of luck, I was able to follow that through with the rest of my career.
Mm-hmm.
So,
can I ask you a question that
yes.
I always wanted to ask you and it's not here? It's the question about your family's names.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's the question, I mean, a lot of people who have read the book have said, the Hobsons.
Mhm.
And your family doesn't all share the same name. And you said when,
John and Sarah Hobson.
yes, but when you identify yourself as Antonio Salazar-Hobson.
Yes.
But you said, but my real name, my family name is Antonio Salazar.
Y Balon.
Yes.
Yes.
So my question has always been, and Salazar Paz,
Yeah.
right? So Salazar, why did you keep Hobson in your name?
Well, you know, it's
I hope that's okay to ask, but
it's
I think a lot of
no,
people
no,
say,
it's-
with the
I-
naming, why do
no,
you keep Hobson?
No,
in your
I
name?
mean, why would you keep the name of your predators?
Yes.
Okay. It's a simple answer. All of my degrees, from elementary school, graduate school, law degree, all have the same name. It's Antonio Salazar-Hobson. So I was stuck with that. I just passed the bar. What do? I went into court 2 weeks later, and the judge called my name and said, "Well, Mr. Hobson, are you ready to present?" And I just froze. I had just a cathartic moment, and I said, "I will never be addressed by the name Hobson in my life. It has to be Salazar." And so the only way that I could easily do it was to insert a hyphen, and 3 weeks later, I had my name changed. Now, obviously, I would have dropped the damn name, and I would have gone to Bailon. But you know, this is my own evolution, and this is how I made it work. So.
I want to make a suggestion, which is there's a story in the Talmud that talks about what is a fine name. Tov Shem Mishem and Tov. And it says, a good name is better than the finest anointing oil that we used to use to anoint the priests. And what I take from that and from the name Hobson is that Hobson was a name of predators, of pedophiles, who abused you. But you are so powerful, you were actually able to take the name Hobson and to turn it into a good name.
Well, it turns out, I mean,
exactly. When I think of Salazar-Hobson, I think of a good man, and that's you.
Well, you know, I was kept isolated until the age of 7. I met no children from the age of 4 to 7, entirely by myself. And only because John and Sarah Hobson were afraid that I would be picked up for being a truant. That is the only reason why I ever saw another child at age 7. And I went into the 5th grade at that point. And I was called Tony S. Hobson. Tony S. Hobson, that was my name. That was my name even through high school. You know, with some of my friends, it was Antonio. Obviously, with my Mexican families, I was Antonio. And then in high school, I just decided that's my name, and that's what I'm going to use. And so, you know, it's this whole part of stripping someone's identity, saying, I can take you and I can strip you of your name and your identity, and you are now Tony Hobson. That's it. Don't look past that. How did that happen? Well, you have no adoption papers. You have nothing legal to show that you really have the right to be with this child. But I will tell you, you know, one of the things when you talk about desperate resources, I mean, I use my own example. I was kidnapped. I was a monolingual child from a very poor family, apparently utterly disposable, just like all Chicanos were in Arizona, quite frankly, and indigenous people as well, and black people. So it was, you know, it was reported for 2 years, an investigation to find me, where they never did anything. They never even interviewed John and Sarah. They never even ran their social security numbers to find out where they were. They were never charged, and they lived their entire lives with impunity. Why? Because of the great deal of white privilege, particularly if you're educated. And so that's what bought the day for them. They're, you know, well-positioned, quote unquote, educated white people who had the generosity to take this little Mexican boy on. That's the story.
Mm-hmm. You speak a lot about the story of your name and that the memory of the first 4 years of being loved by your mother never left you. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your journey back and finding them.
Well, you know, I started looking for them as soon as I escaped the $3.50 motel that I lived in for 4 years with the Hobsons on the freeway. And I just knew that I would not be complete. I could not, I couldn't lose my family. They were part of me. And I didn't have all the resources, the financial resources to find them. And I was a young person struggling just to make my life sort of okay at the time. And finally, when I married, Catherine and I, although we were poor at the time, we were able to hire a private investigator with the help of her family, and we found them. And that was 40 years ago. I've been with them every day from 5:30 in the morning to 7 in the morning, virtually without exception, with my siblings. We range from all the way up to the age 94. And so it's a rich base to draw from. But I will tell you that I was very anxious about meeting my mother, Petra, and I write about my anxiety about that, and would I be accepted, and would there be anything that she saw in me that she felt would be of value, and would I be Chicano enough, and is there anything that I missed on this exam to make sure that she just wouldn't shut the door. Right? And I spent years of convoluted life trying to prove myself, because I knew I was going to back home to my family. And that's why I was a farm worker. That's why I was I made sure that I did manual labor. I found comfort in that. And, but I was really unsure, despite all the things, the degrees and the cases I had done. And I decided that I had to meet her by myself. Without press, because there was a lot of press on the first visit, and we said no, we're not coming. And all I did is, I tapped the door at the suite where she was staying, and all I said was "Hola, madre," and she looked at me, and we just burst into tears. And I'm not someone who cries very often, but we had the most intimate exchange of our lives, and all she needed, she didn't need all the other things I was doing. She needed none of them. All she needed to know was to see her son, and she hoped that I spoke Spanish, which I did. And so we spent that day, and the next day I went to see my siblings for the first time. Remember, I come from a family of 14 siblings, and it was very glorious. I must say that I had, I had to prove myself to my brothers, all 7 of them there, who were sort of stony-faced and say, "Who the hell is this guy?" Right? And is he some anglicized Chicano who's left us far behind? Right? That's the easy mark-off. Well, it turns out that I wasn't that. And I told them how difficult my life had been, and I told them how I thought about them every day, and that but for them, I would not be where I was. And that I needed to be home. Now, there were a couple advantages that I had. I looked like all my siblings. I looked like all my brothers. When I walked out to the lawn to meet my brothers, 7 of them, who were going to decide, was I okay or not okay, it turns out that I had my father's gait, and it turns out that I had my father's smile. And so it was obvious. Here I am, boys. And I think that really helped. And the fact that I was very humble, and I realized that this was sort of cut the bullshit, tell them who you are, and tell them what you need and how proud you are of them, and that you want to be part of them. And it's, there have been crushing things that have happened in my family, and you'll hear more about that. But we've survived, we're proud, we're together. And they're very proud of this story. I mean, they are so proud that their story is being told. And when they heard about the news today, they were all elated. So,
Would you grace us with a little bit of reading from the book itself?
Sure.
I told Antonio, this is happening in a synagogue, and his chapter about faith has a lot to do with his relationship with Catherine and how he was able to embrace Judaism as an adult.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. This is chapter 20, 3. It's entitled Knowing, and the first segment is entitled Faith. It's about 1.5 minutes long, I'd say. So, from June to the first week in August 2020, I lost my 3 siblings, Helen, Stella, and Rudy. Mando died in April 2021. These recent deaths mean that I have lost Petra, 2 sisters, and 6 brothers from the family I tried so hard to find. I could look at their deaths as just more tragedies in a life filled with great pain. Let me explain why this is not my choice. This is a personal explanation, although I'm well aware of our world's terrible suffering through famine and flood and war that provides perspective to anyone's life. I'm often asked whether I believe in God, in a divine presence by whatever name you choose, that is greater than all of us. Do not confuse me with someone who believes that he was placed on this earth to serve a particular God and is guided every turn by faith. That is the most distant of images and does not apply to me. I had no name for the faith that came to me at age 10, in the months after my attempted suicide. At 9, I had tried to take my life by hanging myself in the shower after my last rape at the ranch where I had been sent for a 3rd summer to live with my predators. As I wondered over and over why I survived, in seconds, inexplicably, a belief in a divine presence came to me. In that instant, I knew there was a sacred power, and I accepted this gift with its unknown potential. I believe then, as I do now, that this divine presence broke the shower pipe, thus saving my life. This divine presence provided that my life should not be over at age 9, and that there was something more promising for me. I reached my faith despite John and Sarah's continuous themes of aggressive atheism. I had little knowledge of God beyond the grace that Jaime and Maria Elena said before the meals they shared with me at the ranch. But I knew that God was good. I never raised my faith with the Hobsons, knowing that they would disparage it and soil it. It was essential to keep it private, without ritual or a building in which to gather and worship. I have traveled my life with a great deal of hardship, but also great good fortune and a sustaining power beyond my own understanding. As I struggled to survive, my faith helped me find the way up the heavily occluded steps towards a full and loving life. I have recognized this divine presence very strongly in moments of great joy, such as my marriage to Catherine, my return to my family, and the birth of my children. In my lowest troubled moments, a hand of destiny seemed to guide me through and allow me to survive. When I accepted Judaism into my life, my faith found a home. This is now the source and expression of my belief. So, it's all very true. So, and you were a big part of it, and I must admit that we have Rabbi Alan Bennett, who helped me with my book, whom I met 33 years ago in the struggle for equality for rabbis, and I have been blessed to have that guidance and that friendship, and it also led to you. So I've been surrounded by the best of people. I've benefited from that, as well as my family.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for Rabbi Bennett. Thank you for bringing Antonio here. We appreciate that so much. And I must say that the young woman sitting next to you, Rita Semmel, who is the founder of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, is here with us tonight, and a beloved board member of our congregation. And Rita has done so much for all of us. Yeah. And whenever I see you, Rita, I think about the inspiration of working together as an interfaith community, sure. And to have a Chicano Jew, or a Jewish Chicano, depending on how you define yourself, here and to share this story is a story of great tikva, of great hope. And I want to give our congregational audience here some time if you have any questions that you would like to address to Antonio. He said he would be willing to take some personal questions.
I would just like to preface that it was Rita and it was Alan back in 1994 that took me to Israel for those 3 weeks. And it was one of the most moving events of my life. And it led me to think, where am I going? Where do I want to be? Is this right for me? And then Alan said, take your time. And Alan, you made me take three years to do it, for goodness sakes. Thank you very much. And I realized that it offered a balance of social responsibility, of faith in God, and an obligation to do well, and that it was mostly just an expression of love, how we do that. And I like that about our faith. I like that we try to be responsible people. So this is the community that has become my own, and I want to thank Rita and Rabbi Bennett for that as well.
We thank you for joining us to enrich all of our lives.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me.
Does anybody like to lead off with a question? Yes, Susan.
First of all, thank you. So if this is too personal, please, you have the right to say no.
Sure.
But I'm curious, when you converted to Judaism, how your siblings felt about that. Was that something they accepted? Was it something you needed?
It was something which they fully accepted, and there's a reason for that, because most of them are evangelicals, and we fit neatly in the evangelical tour. So I have brothers who've been ministers, brothers whom I pray with, 4:30 in the morning for 10, 11 years at a time, in our separate faiths. And I have received immense respect from my family, not one bit of doubt. And so I'm just proud of how instinctual that was for the Salazars.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have like 100 questions, so just wanted to give people the opportunity if something struck you in the story. What I want to know, Antonio, is that little piece of the book, that's how well it's written. Every single chapter. You are so eloquent. You're an eloquent speaker, and that doesn't always mean you're going to be an eloquent writer. But the book is, as I said, very difficult, challenging to read, but your eloquence and how much grace there is really lends itself to the story. You have a book and a story. What is your hope that now that you're on basically a national tour and you are showing up in Spanish and in English, what do you hope the impact of this book is going to be?
Well, the impact is that it needs to open doors, and it has been doing that. And like for example, I've just been invited to teach at Stanford on this issue next month, and that's where I met Catherine, my wife, and I believe that the reason why they extended that is because they see the importance of the issue, and so it is. It's my hope that we build a coalition of which is really a standard coalition of communities of color, of our white allies who've been there forever in these civil rights movements, people whom we've counted on, and to really combine those forces and say, this affects all of us. We have a $34 trillion budget. No monies are allotted to find children of color, and more importantly, there aren't enough monies to deal with any abducted child. And so what I want to be able to do, and I used to be, quite frankly, I was a lobbyist, both federal and state lobbyist. I'm a political person, and my goal is to create enough momentum that legislatively, federally, that we can get both recognition, as it were, and funding. And I believe that we have many California leaders who are very receptive to that, and I hope to be one of the vehicles that convinces them to say, yes, we can do this. Even the Republicans have this happening in their constituencies. It's a win-win, but we have to see it in the light of day and say, we can do something about it together, without blame, now. So.
One of the things that I think we need is some clarification about the issue itself. When so much was going wrong at the border during the Trump administration, I was with a group of rabbis called Rabbis for Human Rights that was invited to go down to Ciudad Juarez and El Paso. And we traveled down there together and went to the border, and we're very, very focused on immigration, and the abuses, and what could we do in terms of advocacy, in terms of policy. And I think it's very important. I think the issue of immigration is a very important issue. But you're talking about something different, which there are children in this country already who are being victimized, that we're not focusing on.
Yes,
and I think that's something to clarify.
That's absolutely right. For example, in Los Angeles, there are 40,000 trafficked children between the border and LA. And I've been asked to say, listen, if your voice, if your program gets heard, if your admonitions and your kindness gets heard, even if you save one person, that will be something. So, Antonio, you need to come down to Los Angeles now. And there's a fair amount of truth in that. There is. But what I'm really hoping is to make sure that I provide an accessible message for all audiences that are not intimidating, but I need to tell people there are ways to get help. There are ways to get help. And so, yes, my next project is to go deal with the 40,000 trafficked children in Los Angeles. And then that's being followed, by what I'm doing with the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is the largest event for trafficked children in the country. They bring in 35 to 45,000 boys and girls for 10 days to be used by affluent predators. This is the truth. And so one of the things that we're doing is this campaign is around the Super Bowl itself. Anything that brings this to light, that we can do something. And you don't want to present people with the impossible or the intimidating. You want to just say, just link arms. We're family. We can do this. We can speak for our children, and we can go find our children. And quite frankly, I just want to end with a comment about what happens to a family who's had an abducted child. It just doesn't affect that child. It doesn't affect just those parents. It affects the entire family and their community. And for example, in my case, my family shattered within 10 days of my abduction. They never got back together. Within 10 days, gone, shattered. It wasn't until I returned 24 years later that my family decided that they could reunite. That's how hard the pain they carried. This is how much hurt they carried, and they could no longer find a family to hold on to. This has happened in thousands of cases. So when you think about abducted children, think about how it ripples out, and often how these ripples, are permanent, these losses. So I believe that there's a whole way to rebuild our society. There really is. We have this innate humanity, we have this innate goodness, we have this innate love for children. Let's just tap all those things. Not in the pie in the sky, we're all going to be swell, but in the realistic world that this is what we want to do. There's no one who doesn't want to help this. So let's focus and find a way to bring it to fruition.
Antonio, it is, again, my honor to have read the book, to have blurbed the book, to have you as a beloved member of our community, and your bravery speaks for itself. You are a complete mensch to have written it and then to bring it out and to keep talking about it amidst all of the other mitzvot that you continue to do in your own work. I want to thank you, and I know that you brought some books so that if people wanted to have a little bit of time with Antonio, I know you're going to stay. We'll stay and we'll have a little bit more intimate conversation over here.
Sure.
Please buy the book. And I think I want to end with Tikva with hope, which is if you're inspired about Antonio's story, it's a story of one boy who, I don't want to say miraculously, you found faith, but it's a miracle what you have done with the story. And I think it's a story of transformation. It's a story that can transform you when you read this book. And so my hope is that we continue to work together, and especially with the interfaith work that we do, to change the world for children. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Ariana's our membership director, so if you're not yet a member, you can talk to her.
We
So
can
come on
fix
up.
that.